Hello and welcome to the No Hesitations podcast. We are your co-hosts,
Kristen Marvin with Solutions by Kristen,
and Nick Spinelli. That's me. Kristen is the founder of Solutions by Kristen, which partners with companies to accelerate their leadership development internally so they can increase retention and thrive.
Nick is an outdoor educator exploring the indoor wilderness. Nick spent the first decade of his career making connections between people, between programs, between systems to build community resilience, and is on a mission to be a model for change.
It sounds great. We talk about all things leadership, successes, challenges, and every topic in between with the goal of helping you, yes, you, to become a better leader.
Subscribe or follow and join the conversation each week on Spotify and Apple Podcasts because there's no time like the present to listen in and level up.
Nice job, Kristen. New intro. That's exciting for all of us who have been following. For all those of you who have been following us for at least a few episodes now, thank you for rolling with the punches on that one. Kristen, who have we got today? What's going down?
Yeah, we are super excited today to welcome Jim Taylor to the show. Thank you, Jim, for being here in our very early stages of the podcast. Nick, just a quick moment to celebrate. We hit our first milestone of over 100 downloads 3 weeks into the show. So congratulations to everybody. Yes.
Triple digits.
Much to
That's
celebrate.
exciting.
Here we go. On to the next one. As usual, I take about 2 seconds to celebrate and then we're on to the next goal. So here we go. Jim Taylor is an entrepreneur, thought leader, and restaurateur. Over the last 20 plus years, Jim has both helped to fuel the growth of a leading national restaurant brand, as well as consulted with hundreds of other restaurants to navigate the ever-changing restaurant industry. As the founder and CEO of Benchmark 60 Restaurant Services, Jim has worked alongside small, medium, and large restaurant companies in both North America and the UK in order to help them understand how new concepts like compartmentalized business productivity and employee workload are both measured and leveraged in order to improve the hospitality industry. His encouragement for leaders to see things differently has been instrumental in the strategy and execution of several successful businesses. Jim is the co-host of Turning the Table, the most progressive weekly podcast for today's food and beverage industry, featuring staff-centric operating solutions for restaurants, and was recently named to Vancouver, British Columbia's top 100 business innovators of 2022. Everything comes back to people for Jim, and he believes that our industry needs to stick together in order to survive. Through his work with strategic partners, as well as a growing team of consultants, his goal is to make the restaurant industry a strongly desired place for people to continue to find both their first job and their dream job. Jim is confident that there is a new way forward for the industry and is on a mission to improve the career experience for the next generation of hospitality professionals. He believes that there are more simple ways to look at the business model, and that by looking through a new lens, industry leaders will be able to more easily attract and retain people while also making the financial side of the business less stressful. All in all, he's motivated to think differently, protect people, change restaurants, and believes retention is the new cool. Welcome, Jim. Holy moly.
Well, it's a mouthful, isn't it?
That's a lot. Yeah.
That was awesome.
Thank you so much. That's excited to be here and have a chance to discuss with you. Sorry that bio or that intro is so long.
No, it's incredible. I had to read it a few times. Congratulations on the award for Top 100 Business Innovators for 2022. That's incredible. How did that come to be?
To be honest, I don't know.
Perfect.
There's a group that does that same award or whatever you want to call it in the top 100 cities in the world. So they do the top 100 innovators in the top 100 cities. And I was nominated anonymously. I don't know where it came from. So it could have been a strategic partner of ours. It could have been a client. It could have been a former colleague or employee. I honestly don't know. I just heard from them one day that we'd been nominated, and then we, won the award. So really, really cool. Very humbling.
Yeah, that's great. That's great.
Totally.
Would you speak to us a little bit about your mission to improve the hospitality industry and where that came from?
Well, I think I kind of always had that maybe in the back of my mind somewhere. I've been in hospitality my whole career. I was the 12-year-old that, my parents taught me how to open a beer bottle and a wine bottle so I could bartend their friend's Christmas party kind of thing. So I've kind of always been in hospitality. I remember telling my parents I was going to be a chef when I was, 10 or 12 years old. So I've always been in that industry, and I kind of always felt like there was maybe better ways to do things or different ways to do things, or we could just, some of the way we've always done it just, doesn't always work. It didn't really kind of come to the forefront, obviously, until the pandemic happened and things were really shaken up. And then I left my fairly comfortable, I should be careful saying comfortable, but fairly comfortable executive position with a growing, successful restaurant brand. I'd been with them for 20 years. I just stopped with no plan and thought I need to just help the industry move forward. So I didn't know exactly where it came from or what was causing. I just had this sort of pull. So it's been an interesting journey.
Nice. Nick, and I know you've got a burning question that's running through your mind right now. What is it?
I was thinking two things. One is more of an observation than a question. Jim, you might be the first 12-year-old that I've heard about in a long time. And I'm not kidding when I say this, where you actually followed through with the commitment that you made. You're like, I want to be a chef. And, most parents, I think on one hand, they're elated, right? They're like, awesome, he's got a plan. And on the other hand, they're like, all right, and then you're probably going to grow up and be like an archaeologist or like an astronaut or like, whatever, right? You actually did it. So congrats. There's a through line there. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, kind of. I never actually became a chef per se, but my parents definitely were. I remember my dad saying, no, you're not. You don't want to work in that industry. You don't want to make hardly any money, to work way too many hours, to work at night and shift work and weekends and evenings and, all of the things that are stereotypical of the restaurant industry. They definitely encouraged me not to do that, but here we are.
Yeah. Here you are. I'm wondering, and stop me if I'm getting ahead of myself. You said that it was really just, I'm paraphrasing, it was a gut feeling that led you to leaving your previous position and moving into your current work. From a risk-taking standpoint, I mean, that's huge, right? To give up that job and to start something new. What do you think prepared you for that moment, to take that step? Because it's one thing to it's one thing to know that that's what you wanted to do. It's another thing to be prepared enough, even just to tolerate the unknown, right? Mm-hmm. And to make that leap. What really led up to that moment for you in terms of the prep, even just life experiences, whatever, that really allowed you to take that step into the unknown?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I've always been a fairly confident person in my own abilities, and I've always believed that community and networking is really important. And so when the world went sideways, especially in the hospitality industry, some of the things that were either important or routine or regular or comfortable were gone, right? So a lot of or at least temporarily gone, but a lot of the things that I loved about my current role didn't exist anymore. Mm. So, I kind of at that point thought, if it's time to make a change, even though I don't know what that change is going to lead to, if there's ever a time, it's probably now, and I also had this pull, like I said earlier, that network and that community needed help, right? The industry was in trouble. And I think I really, when I left my career or position or whatever you want to call it, I didn't have a plan until that network and that community. I was very lucky that some of them reached out and said, I hear you're a free agent and I need some help. So I literally said to my family, I'll give this 4 months and see how it goes. And maybe it's just a project while I look for what's next. And it just became what's next.
Mm. Jim, when you started, when you just said, I'm going to give this 4 months, and you just sat back and you let all those doors open and you started reaching out to the community and you started networking, what opportunities became available to you?
Well, the first opportunity I think that came up was that I sort of fell accidentally into some consulting type work. And I realized really quickly that I'd been very sheltered I was in a corporate environment with a nice big shiny head office, and I wore a suit to work every day in the restaurant industry. And I really quickly realized that the real restaurant industry was not like that. And the real restaurant industry needed even more help than I thought. There was even more opportunity than I thought. There was even more community than I thought. It was just it was a very eye-opening experience. So the first things that came up opportunity-wise were just to get in there and start just trying to do anything I could to help. So it's funny because the first consulting work that I did was just very much take on whatever I can to just help anybody I know, hopefully dig their way out of a hole. It wasn't overly strategic. It wasn't, there wasn't a big plan. There wasn't anything. It was just, let's see how we can help.
Yeah. It's like when you're working a shift in the restaurant and you've got to jump on the line and dig a chef out, you learn so much about that station and about, what's going on, or if somebody calls in sick, you learn how to quickly step back and go, I can make this more efficient. I need to clean this, or, these are the steps that I need to take to execute.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, there was one restaurant that I was working with, one of the first ones that I took on a consulting position with, which I did a lot of it totally wrong, I think, but another story for another day.
It's good that you recognize that now. And this,
yeah. That restaurant.
And I apologize to them if I screwed up for them, but
I
was doing everything from one day I'm food running, and the next day I'm training their manager how to do inventory, and the next day I'm helping their marketing team, and the next day I'm, pouring drinks because their bartender called in sick. And I was going,
well, come on, Jim, you said you wanted to help. That you're
right?
But not like that. No.
There was interesting learning that way too, right? Because I also realized that, from a business perspective, if I really want to help, this isn't the way to do it. Mm-hmm. This isn't scalable. This isn't really doing them any favors. It's just patching a hole. And sure, it's, a little bit of income and helping them short term, but this isn't really, where the actual opportunity to help is.
Mm-hmm. Will you talk a little bit more about those first couple of years as you were growing your business? How did you continue to innovate, and how did you continue to develop in that role as an entrepreneur?
Well, I could answer that so many different ways. Well, I think imposter syndrome is a big part of that. I had somebody tell me quite early on in my journey, I'm still early in my journey, but I had someone early in my journey tell me that imposter syndrome is your body's way of telling you that you're leveling up. And because I was constantly going, I'm not a business person, I'm not an entrepreneur. What's this is just temporary, I can't even accept Visa. Like, it was just very patchwork together, right? But I think that feeling of, is this real? Could this be real? Is this an actual opportunity? Forced me to look at everything from how do I get the word out about what I'm doing, to how do I package this in a way that's more scalable, to how do I differentiate what I'm working on, to how do I make it clear about how I can help to as many people as quickly as possible. All of those things, it forced me to start to, we talk about compartmentalizing in some of the business as well, but it forced me to compartmentalize and be able to work on all those things simultaneously, basically, so that it could actually turn into a real business and not just a, one-off here and run food for this restaurant over here. And, what unfortunately, a lot of consultants, I think, fall into.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
When was that moment that you knew that you had something and it was going to work?
A lot of the work that, this is one I can answer quite clearly. A lot of the work that Benchmark 60, our advisory firm, does is based around, and for sure it was then, helping restaurants negate rising costs without raising their prices. And a lot of it has to do with labor cost, which is such a huge chunk of the business model. Mm-hmm. I had somebody on one of the big social media platforms and in their podcast introduce me as Canada's labor cost expert.
Wow.
And I went,
talk about imposter syndrome. That's like, there you go. Like that's a title.
And I jokingly, when we were off the air, said, I didn't even know I was that.
Love that. That's not in the bio. Where'd you get that?
Yeah.
But then they all laugh and they're like, "Oh, that's funny," and you're like, "No, that wasn't.
No.
I'm serious. Like I didn't actually know that was me."
Yeah, but it gave me a lot of confidence that there's opportunity there, right? That's a real, tangible thing that the industry needs.
Mm-hmm.
And it also gave me a really good reminder of how important positioning is, right? There are thousands of consultants in the hospitality industry in Canada, but that was probably within 90 days. Somebody was telling the industry that I was Canada's expert in one part of the industry. And I went, geez, if that's how I'm positioning, that's a really good thing.
Yeah. Maybe those are the same people that gave you the Innovator Award.
Maybe, I'm not sure. Yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
You and I've been working together for about 6 months now, which is just, I've learned so much, and we could talk about that forever. I'm very grateful. But I remember early on, you said, when I started to tell people I was going to be a consultant in the hospitality space, they were like, "Don't do it."
Don't do it.
And that was, again, I think like right when you and I started working together, and that comment either could have like scared me off or did, which was say, "Fuck that. I'm leaning in. I'm leaning into this." What has been the driver for you to continue to push? This is challenging. It's a challenging space to be in, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
What continues to drive you to want to do this work every single day?
Well, maybe it's just kind of partly my personality, and maybe some of this happened a little bit by accident. But when people say things like that to me, I actually quite often lean in harder.
Mm-hmm.
Right. My dad was an Olympian, and he's very much about you're in control of your destiny. And, sometimes it's like, it's kind of cheesy. But when I was growing up playing sports, if I didn't get enough playing time and complained about it, his response was, "Well, what are you going to do about it? You should practice harder. You should try harder. You should whatever." So anyways, fast forward to, you don't want to be a consultant. It's terrible. It's feast or famine. It's unpredictable. It's this or that. I thought, well, that sounds terrible. Why would anyone want to do that? I should probably find a way that isn't like that. And I had people say things, well, consultants just trade time for money. Right. And it's a 2-month project. You're 50 hours a week. You never see your family. And then you have 2 months where you don't have a job. And so everything about the business model that we've built at Benchmark 60 is actually positioned completely against that. So how long we work with clients, what the engagements are designed to look like, what the revenue model is based on, how much time we spend with clients, whether we do it in person or virtually, all of that is designed intentionally to go against the traditional model of how consultants operate.
And you found
Jim,
out
maybe.
Oh, go ahead, Nick.
No, go ahead, Kristen. You're good.
No, you're good. You're good. You got it.
You. Jim, just for our listeners' sake, I think everybody knows what consulting is and can kind of picture what that looks like. But just something I want to call attention to right now, as the two of you were talking, there does seem to be this like really negative perception around the industry, right? Mm-hmm. Like you just named a whole bunch of stereotypes about consultants and the nature of their work. Yeah. And so I would be curious to hear you expound a little bit on what you have discovered to be true and not true in your own personal experience over these first few years of your business, but then also, what maybe you want to debunk about it for listeners, because you just said it. You said that you've designed your entire business model with Benchmark 60 to push back against that and to do business differently. What has that looked like for you, and what have you found out to be quite simply not true based on what you were told coming in?
Well, I think a lot of consultants, and don't get me wrong, there's so many consultants that do amazing work in all kinds of different ways, including hospitality. But I found, and this goes back to the one day I was food running, the next day I'm teaching somebody to do inventory, the next day I found that consulting, including what my experience was and what a lot of people told me, was very project-based work that was very much due for. Right? So someone might say, "Hey, Jim, we need some help with training our managers how to do inventory." And can you work with us for a month to train our managers how to do inventory? Well, I probably could, but wouldn't it be better if I trained you how to train your managers how to do inventory so you can do it forever? And rather than, the analogy that I always use is, rather than fishing for you, why don't I teach you how to fish?
Yes.
So, thinking about that and the debunking and all that kind of thing, we sort of said, okay, let's design this as do with rather than do for, which allows us to spend, like I said, longer periods of time with companies. It also is collaborative, which doesn't seem so, well, you're just going to come in and do some stuff for us, send us a big invoice and then disappear. Right. A lot of the feedback that I always got initially from restaurant people about why they didn't like working with consultants was because someone would show up and potentially even do an amazing job for a period of time. But as soon as they were gone, so was all the result.
Well, that sounds like that person was just performing a service then. They weren't actually creating any sort of transformative, long-lasting change, which is, an easy criticism to make, but it's true, right? Like how effective was your work actually if the moment that you step away, all the benefits disappear?
Well, and I'm not trying to say that there's anything wrong with that model, right? It's
sure.
A model that has existed for a very long time, and a lot of people have a lot of success that way. The unfortunate side, in my personal experience, is that it has given a little bit of a negative feeling in specifically in the hospitality industry around that type of engagement. So again, we just went and said, okay, let's position everything against those stereotypes and those challenges.
Yeah, it's an important point that you make, and I think it's important for restaurant owners that are thinking about hiring a coach or hiring a consultant to think about it. It's a mindset shift, right? They should be asking questions of that consultant or that coach of, how do I make this sustainable? How can I make sure that when I'm not in the building that these things are still going to be implemented? How do we implement this? How, and again, it all starts with the leadership team being the expert first before they teach the team.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's an ever evolving thing, but it's been an interesting process for sure. And I mean, I've learned so much through it. So
yeah, that's awesome. I want to talk a little bit about how you work on developing yourself. How did you get to become that top innovator?
I'm not sure.
Leadership is,
like I said, I don't know where it came from.
Yeah.
I'm still processing it. You're like, that's right. I am the top innovator. I am the expert.
I want to make sure Jim has taken plenty of time to celebrate this moment. I know it's been over a year, but thanks. Anyway, we're still talking about it. But no, being an entrepreneur is really lonely, right? And that's one of the things that I've enjoyed about our partnership is it's important to have somebody that you can bounce ideas off of and that you can throw things against the wall, and see what sticks and just learn from, but there's camaraderie there too. And I wonder, how you've been able to hone that skill and use it to really grow yourself, but also not burn yourself out, because that's also really easy to do as an entrepreneur.
There's a couple things that I'll maybe touch on. One is that, it's something really simple. I very rarely get in the car and listen to music. I'm always listening to a book or a podcast, or I'm listening to something specifically related to something that I'm either thinking about or working on, or, that kind of thing. And I think a lot of people do that, but there's so much value there. The second one is, this is something that I think I did initially out of probably a feast or famine type mindset, but it's grown to be something that is definitely a core value of myself and the business. Is I basically just never say no to a conversation. Like, I was talking today to a junior manager at Walk On Sports Bistro in Alabama. I've never been to Alabama. I've never been to that restaurant. I've never met this person, and they just reached out through seeing some content and said, "Hey, I have a question for you." Sure, let's chat. I might learn something. You never know, right? And the third part is, I think I remember the specific. I don't remember the date. I should have written it down, but I remember the specific conversation when I realized the importance of strategic partnerships. I was sitting down to have dinner with my wife, and I was just, it was early days in the business, and I was kind of banging my head against the wall, and I was vented to her. I said, what the, like, I'm so frustrated. I just keep talking to people all day that think what I'm doing is awesome, and they believe in what I'm trying to accomplish, but they're never going to be a customer. They're never going to buy anything from me. They're never going to be a client. And then I caught myself and went, hold on a second, but they're talking to everybody that it could be. So there was, I think, both camaraderie opportunity, community opportunity, business opportunity in really leaning into what that all was all about. And, now I would say that some of the strategic partnerships that exist as a solopreneur, basically, are some of the things that motivate me more every day than anything else. They keep me going. They're exciting. There's opportunity, so I think just encourage people to lean into that.
Nice. How do you take a break from it all as an entrepreneur too? You're in it all the time, right? Like if you're anything like me, you're constantly, every conversation is content. You're learning something. It's conversations take me back to my time on the floor. How do you, I think about it morning, noon, and night, right? Every time I see something, I'm like, I want to do that, or I want to implement that. How do you get away from it all?
Well, I think you have to be disciplined, right? I mean, you have to, for me, for an example, something that I'm working on, and this isn't an overnight thing, but something I'm personally working on right now is condensing my schedule. My schedule used to be 7 days a week. Then it was like, I'm going to try and not work on weekends. And now as much as possible, my schedule is Tuesday to Friday. And I try to automate on weekends. I try to automate on Mondays if there's opportunity to do that kind of stuff. And my actual work and time with clients and partners happens between Tuesday and Friday from 8 to 4 kind of thing. So I think just really setting boundaries and, committing to, there's other stuff that's just as important, if not more important.
Yeah.
It's not easy though. Because as soon as you start to slow down, imposter syndrome chimes in and goes, is this real? Can this be, can this keep happening or whatever, right?
If I take time off, is my business still going to be successful? And if my business isn't successful, how am I going to make money? And if I don't make money, what am I going to,
Well, and the going back to the comments about the traditional consulting method, time for money, right? I mean, if you stop, you literally stop. So, I think in an effort to accomplish some life balance things, time with family. I mean, we have a young daughter. I want to spend time with her. I have to constantly be looking at the business model in ways to make it so that it will keep going when I stop.
Yeah. Nick, what else do you want to know from Jim?
I actually have an idea. We don't have to get too deep into this, but Jim, there was an article I read this morning that I wanted to ask you about. Okay. And I'm wondering if we couldn't actually use this as a very brief demonstration of your personal pedagogy, the way that you approach consulting. I'm putting you on the spot here for a second. Okay. I'm wondering if we couldn't role play a little bit. Sure. Imagine I'm a business owner. You just met me in the flow of your day. It's one of these conversations you were just describing, right? Mm-hmm. And I mentioned this idea to you, and I'm like, hey, what do you think about that? I would be really curious to see how you take this in real time and process it and the kind of questions you ask and what your process is, right? So this was actually just this morning in the BBC. I can't make this up. Finance and economy, why surge pricing is coming at restaurants, online retailers, and more. Whether it's a Friday evening flight, a hotel during the holidays, or a taxi ride in a downpour, we have all been burned by higher than normal prices due to excess demand. Raising costs when businesses are busiest is the norm across the travel industry, for instance. But now consumers are beginning to see these quote-unquote surge prices in more sectors. The concept of dynamic pricing is simple and easy for businesses to implement. Quote, surge pricing is directly linked to increases in demand. In periods of high demand, the scarce goods are more valuable and companies can increase their prices. So obviously we all know about this from rideshare companies like Lyft and Uber, right? Mm-hmm. But I read this article and I thought, damn, so does that mean that if I go out on a Friday night to dinner, that I could potentially be paying 3%, 5%, 10%, 25% more for the food that I would be buying than I would be at another time, right? So if I'm a business and I'm looking at this and I'm saying, damn, how do I make sense of that? Is that good for me? Is that actually bad for customers? Like what What's your 2 cents on that? What would you say to someone that brought that to you and said, what do you make of that?
Well, that's a really relevant and really good article, whatever it is. Send it to me.
I'll make sure that we get a description for this episode. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think you said that you want this from a consulting perspective, not maybe necessarily my personal opinion, but they kind of
sure how you'd approach it as a professional. Yeah.
So I would encourage an operator of a restaurant to consider what is currently happening in our industry in terms of how it relates to that. So what I mean by that is that dynamic pricing, not surge pricing, but dynamic pricing has existed in restaurants for decades. We call it happy hour. We call it market price, right? We do it. The restaurant industry has been doing it for years, but in a bit of a different way, right? So we've been reducing prices to try to drive traffic at downtimes, right? Happy hour. We've been calling it market price to protect our cost of goods on things like lobster that is really expensive to serve, and we don't want to lose money when we serve it. So now what I would encourage an operator to think about is if you look at this the way that the hotel industry does or the airline industry does, they cater to both, right? The airline industry does a very good job of dynamic pricing, because if you want a $150 flight from Vancouver to Tucson, you can get it. You just stop in Seattle and Phoenix along the way or whatever. You can get there for $150 though. If you want to fly direct and have a glass of bubbles while you do it, you just pay $1,000. No problem. It's up to you, the consumer, right? And there are lots of restaurants, specifically in the Western Canadian market right now, and I'm sure in the US there's lots too, that are starting to do this type of thing where you can come and have a full service, amazing experience, filet mignon, do the whole thing at 30% off the price. You just have to dine with us between 2 and 5 p.m. If you come between 5 and 8, it's 30% more. Or if you come after 9, it's cheaper again, right? And so what they've done is they've increased their prices at peak times when they know there's higher demand. And they've actually done happy hour, but on the entire menu in downtimes. And what they're finding is that the whole business model is changing because of that, right? They're seeing customers when they didn't used to see customers. They're seeing sales mix change a little bit during up times and peak times to, specific items. All of those things are really, I think, good for the industry. And there's a few companies that are doing really good work in the dynamic pricing space for hospitality. So I would encourage, and this is where we, not to make this a promotional little thing, but from a consulting perspective with Benchmark 60, this is where we would say, okay, let's really start to break out and compartmentalize some of the data so that we can have a really good understanding of how to turn that information into really clear strategy around what we're trying to accomplish. Because if you just go and put everything on sale, it's not necessarily going to make you any better.
That was great, Nick. Thank you. Love that you found that article today. Yeah, that's super, super interesting to think about it that way, for sure. So thank you, Jim. That's awesome. Jim, tell listeners a little bit more about how they can find you. Where can you find your content? How can they work with you? Give us all the good stuff.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, the best place to find me is probably on LinkedIn. I'm fairly active on that platform, and it's for anyone who doesn't currently use it, you should. It's no matter what industry. I mean, I have people ask me all the time, like, are restaurant people really on LinkedIn? They are.
Yes.
All the time. And you can attest to that.
Yes, they are.
So LinkedIn is definitely a place. I mean, we do all of the Instagram and website stuff, but I would tell people that if they want to find us, LinkedIn's the best place. We do also have a podcast called Turning the Table. We've just pressed snooze on it for right now through the holiday, November and December, but we'll likely be back in the new year. And like I said, I literally almost never say no to a conversation. So I'm happy to chat with anybody.
Awesome. And Jim, you've got a couple cool pieces of content on LinkedIn too that listeners can subscribe to, can read about if they want additional information. We talk about those.
Yeah, there's stuff to listen to. I mean, we do host the podcast on LinkedIn. So I think we're 68 episodes in or something like that are all there as a resource. We've got a little labor cost management playbook that can kind of help operators understand new and innovative ways to manage things, that's available there too. Just try to make sure that there's as many resources as possible for people, big and small.
You do an amazing job of offering so much value. And
thank you.
I know that from personal experience, but I know other people that have worked with you and they all just rave about you. We could all give you an award of our own. So thank you for everything that you do and your passion for the industry. It is unwavering, and it's just been an honor to know you and appreciate you being on the show today. So
likewise.
Awesome. Nick, anything else before we head out?
No, I think that'll do it. I'm not promising anything to our listeners, but odds are Jim will be back. And so if you heard anything in this episode that you liked or you want to follow up on, I mean, of course you can reach out to him directly, but I imagine we will keep the conversation going in the future. Folks, you know what to do. Subscribe and listen in each week on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you find your shows. And be sure to follow Kristen Marvin and Nick Spinelli, that is me, on LinkedIn, and subscribe to the Solutions by Kristen newsletter. We will see you next week. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.